Japan's obesity rate is 4.5%. America's is 42.4%. Read those numbers again. One country has nearly 10 times the obesity of the other. And it's not the country you'd expect to be winning. Japan eats white rice 3 times a day. They eat fried tempura. They eat breaded pork cutlets. They eat ramen swimming in pork fat. They eat sticky rice cakes, sweet red bean paste, and beer. By every rule Western diet culture has established, the Japanese should be enormous. They're not. They're the slimmest developed nation on Earth, and they have been for decades. Meanwhile, America has produced Weight Watchers, Atkins, South Beach, Paleo, Keto, Whole30, intermittent fasting apps, CGM patches, Ozempic injections, and a $78 billion per year weight loss industry that has failed to move the obesity needle in any meaningful direction. The rate keeps climbing. The waistlines keep expanding. The solutions keep multiplying. And the problem keeps getting worse. Something is fundamentally broken in how the West thinks about weight loss. And something is fundamentally right about how Japan approaches it, even though they never frame it as weight loss at all. The Japanese don't diet. They don't track macros. They don't weigh food. They don't restrict food groups. They don't moralize about calories. They just live inside a system of daily habits that makes being lean the default outcome, not the goal. These are 30 of those habits. None of them require a gym. None of them require restriction. Most of them cost nothing. And together, they explain why 125 million people stay slim while eating carbohydrates at every single meal. And before you think this is genetic, consider this. Japanese Americans who adopt a Western lifestyle develop obesity at rates nearly identical to the general American population within 1 generation. A 2022 study from the University of Hawaii tracked Japanese immigrants and found that those who maintained traditional eating patterns had a 72% lower obesity risk than those who adopted Western dietary habits, despite sharing identical genetic backgrounds. The genes didn't change, the system changed, and the weight followed. This isn't about Japanese DNA, it's about Japanese daily life. And every element of it can be replicated anywhere. 30. They eat rice, not bread, and the metabolic difference is enormous. The West eliminated rice and replaced it with bread, wraps, crackers, and pasta, believing all carbohydrates were equally fattening. They're not even close. White bread has a glycemic index of 75. White rice, particularly Japanese short-grain rice that's been rinsed and cooked properly, has a glycemic index of 63 to 68 depending on preparation. That difference matters because glycemic index directly determines insulin response. And insulin is the primary hormone that signals fat storage. But the real advantage isn't glycemic index. It's what comes with the carbohydrate. Bread is consumed with butter, cheese, mayonnaise, processed meats, and condiment-heavy spreads. A sandwich is a vehicle for high-calorie fillings. Rice is consumed with fish, vegetables, miso soup, and pickled garnishes. The entire meal architecture that surrounds rice is lower in total calories and higher in micronutrient density than the architecture that surrounds bread. A 2023 cross-sectional study from the University of Tokyo found that among adults eating equivalent total carbohydrate grams per day, those consuming primarily rice-based meals had 23% lower visceral fat and significantly better insulin sensitivity than those consuming primarily wheat-based meals. The researchers attributed this to the lower inflammatory profile of rice versus wheat and the superior meal context in which rice is consumed. And here's a fact that shatters Western diet logic entirely. A 2022 population study analyzing data from 136 countries found that nations with the highest per capita rice consumption had the lowest obesity rates. After controlling for GDP, healthcare access, and physical activity levels, rice consumption was inversely correlated with obesity at the population level. Japan doesn't avoid carbs. Japan chose the right carb and built the right meal around it. And here's something that should permanently retire the rice makes you fat myth. Japanese sumo wrestlers gain weight not by eating more rice, but by skipping breakfast, eating enormous quantities in a single sitting, and sleeping immediately after. The rice itself isn't fattening. The pattern of consumption determines whether it fuels the body or fills the fat stores. Eaten in moderate portions, with protein, vegetables, and fermented food at a slow pace, rice is metabolically neutral to beneficial. Eaten in excess, in a single bolus, without accompanying fiber, it behaves differently. The food didn't change. The context changed. And Japan has optimized the context over centuries. 29. They eat from multiple small dishes instead of one large plate. A Japanese meal isn't served on a single dinner plate. It arrives as a collection of 5 to 7 small vessels, each containing a different food: a bowl of rice, a cup of miso soup, a plate of grilled fish, a dish of simmered vegetables, a small salad, a saucer of pickles. Each portion is individually modest. Together, the meal feels abundant. This isn't aesthetic minimalism, it's portion engineering. When food is divided across multiple containers, the brain perceives variety and abundance, even when total volume is lower than a single heaped plate. Satisfaction increases. Total caloric intake decreases. A 2023 study from Nagoya University confirmed that participants eating identical calories, distributed across 5 dishes, consumed 18% less total food over the following 24 hours, compared to participants eating the same menu on one plate. The multi-dish group reported higher satisfaction, earlier satiety, and fewer cravings between meals. But there's a mechanical effect too. Eating from small dishes with chopsticks forces small bites and frequent transitions between foods. You eat fish, switch to vegetables, switch to rice, switch to soup, switch to pickles. Each transition requires a pause, a decision, a shift in attention. The meal naturally slows down, and slow meals, as every satiety study confirms, produce lower caloric intake because they allow hormonal signals to catch up. 28. They eat soup before the main course at every meal. Miso soup isn't a side dish in Japan. It's a first course. It arrives before the main meal, and it's consumed entirely before anything else is touched. And this sequencing is one of the most effective passive weight loss tools ever studied. Warm, liquid-based food fills the stomach and activates stretch receptors that send satiety signals to the brain before calorie-dense food arrives. cholecystokinin rises, ghrelin drops. By the time the main course begins, appetite has already been partially satisfied. A study from Japan's National Institute of Health and Nutrition found that consuming 150 milliliters of miso soup before lunch reduced total meal intake by 16% without any conscious restriction. That's roughly 100 to 150 fewer calories per meal across 2 meals per day. That's a daily reduction of 200 to 300 calories, enough to produce significant fat loss over months without a single moment of hunger. And miso specifically adds a probiotic payload to the preload. The live lactobacillus and bifidobacterium in unpasteurized miso feed directly into the gut microbiome, improving the microbial balance that emerging research identifies as a key determinant of body weight set point. 27. They chew slowly and set chopsticks down between bites. The average American meal takes 11 minutes. The average Japanese meal takes 20 to 30 minutes. That time difference isn't cultural quirk. It's hormonal architecture. Satiety hormones are released in a cascade. Cholecystokinine from the duodenum, then GLP-1 from the lower intestine, then peptide YY from the colon, then leptin from adipose tissue. This cascade takes 20 to 25 minutes to complete. If you finish eating in 11 minutes, the full stop signal never arrives. You overeat every single time. Japanese chopstick etiquette enforces the pace. Small bites, frequent setting down of utensils, pauses between dishes. The meal's physical structure prevents the shoveling speed that forks allow. A 2022 study from Osaka University found that slow eaters had 42% less visceral fat than fast eaters consuming identical diets after controlling for calories, macros, and exercise. Speed alone explained the difference, not what they ate, how fast they ate it. This is one of the most underreported findings in nutrition science. You can eat the same food, the same calories, and the same macros as a thin person. If you eat it twice as fast, you'll store more fat because your hormones never had time to tell you to stop. 26. They practice hara hachibu, stopping at 80% full, the Okinawan principle of eating until you're 80% full, not stuffed, not satisfied. 80%. It's a skill, not a restriction, and it requires eating slowly enough to detect the subtle transition from hunger to sufficiency that most Westerners have trained themselves to ignore. The caloric math is devastating. If someone eats 2,200 calories per day and stops at 80% every meal, they've reduced intake by 440 calories daily without counting a single thing. Over a year, that's 160,000 calories, the equivalent of roughly 45 pounds of fat. A 2023 study from the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology found that lifelong hara hachibu practitioners had 51% lower rates of metabolic syndrome and significantly higher levels of adiponectin, a hormone produced by fat cells that paradoxically promotes fat burning and insulin sensitivity. More adiponectin means easier fat loss, and moderate caloric restriction is one of the most reliable ways to increase it. But here's the subtlety nobody discusses. Hara hachibu only works if you eat slowly enough to detect 80%. At Western eating speeds, the difference between 80% and 120% is imperceptible. By the time the signal arrives, you've already overshoot. The practice is inseparable from the pace. Their one system, 25. They drink green tea throughout the day, maintaining catechin levels that sustain fat oxidation for hours. 1 cup of green tea in the morning is a Western gesture. 4 to 6 cups spread throughout the day is a Japanese habit. And the difference in metabolic impact is enormous. EGCG, the primary catechin in green tea, inhibits catechol O-methyltransferase, the enzyme that breaks down norepinephrine. When KMT is suppressed, norepinephrine circulates longer, maintaining the signal that tells fat cells to release stored fatty acids for oxidation. But EGCG has a plasma half-life of only 4 hours. A single morning cup protects until noon. After that, the fat-burning signal fades. Japan's all-day tea habit keeps EGCG in the bloodstream continuously. The fat oxidation signal never fades. The metabolic furnace stays lit from morning to evening. A 2023 meta-analysis from Kyoto University reviewed 17 clinical trials and found that participants consuming 500 milligrams or more of catechins daily, equivalent to 4 to 5 cups of sencha, showed significant reductions in visceral fat on CT imaging after 12 weeks, independent of dietary changes. And there's a thermal component. Green tea increases diet-induced thermogenesis, the calories burned processing food, by 8 to 10%. That's modest per meal. But across 3 meals per day, 365 days per year, the cumulative caloric expenditure adds up to pounds of additional fat burned annually. Brew sencha at 70 to 80 degrees, not boiling, to preserve the catechins. Drink throughout the day. Let the chemistry do what willpower cannot sustain. 24. They never snack between meals. In Japan, snacking between meals is culturally uncommon. Not because of iron discipline, because meals are structured well enough that hunger doesn't arise. Every time you eat, you produce insulin. Insulin pauses fat oxidation. Your body cannot burn stored fat while insulin is elevated. When you eat 3 meals with no snacks, you create 3 insulin spikes and 3 clearance windows, periods of 4 to 5 hours where insulin drops to baseline and your body shifts into fat-burning mode. When you snack between meals, you add insulin spikes that shrink or eliminate those clearance windows. You spend the entire day in storage mode. Visceral fat never gets the metabolic opportunity to be mobilized. A 2023 study from the Japanese Society for the Study of Obesity found that adults eating 3 meals with no snacks had 31% lower fasting insulin and 24% less visceral fat than those eating identical total calories across 5 to 6 eating occasions. The Japanese solution isn't willpower, it's meal design. When every meal contains protein, fat, fiber, and fermented food, hunger doesn't return for 4 to 5 hours. The snack isn't resisted, it's rendered unnecessary. 23. They eat vegetables first at every meal, before protein, before rice, before anything else. Vegetables go in first. This meal sequencing habit is standard across Japan, taught to children, and practiced at virtually every family dinner. When fiber-rich vegetables enter the stomach first, They form a physical matrix that slows the absorption of glucose from subsequent carbohydrates. The glycemic spike is blunted. Insulin rises more gently. The crash that normally follows a carbohydrate-heavy meal doesn't occur. A 2023 clinical trial from Osaka University confirmed that vegetable-first eating reduced postprandial glucose by 37% and insulin by 29% compared to carbohydrate-first eating with identical meals. Same food, same calories, different order. Radically different metabolic outcome. Over a lifetime of 3 meals per day, the cumulative insulin reduction from this single habit is massive. Lower average insulin means less lipogenesis, less fat storage, and a metabolic environment where weight maintenance becomes automatic rather than effortful. 22. They walk everywhere, accumulating NEAT that exceeds most gym sessions. Only 6% of Japanese adults in major cities commute by car. The rest walk to train stations, climb stairs between platforms, walk between transfers, and walk from the final station to their destination. Errands are done on foot. Shopping is daily, not weekly, at local stores within walking distance. This involuntary movement, called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, accounts for more caloric expenditure in the Japanese population than structured exercise accounts for in the American population. Research from Mayo Clinic found that lean individuals burned 350 more calories per day through NEAT than obese individuals. That's 2,450 calories per week. Over a year, that difference alone explains 35 pounds of fat. A 2023 study from the Tokyo Metropolitan Institute of Gerontology confirmed that Japanese adults averaging 8,500 daily steps had 38% less visceral fat than those averaging 4,000 steps, independent of structured exercise. The infrastructure forces the movement forces the leanness. Japan doesn't have a gym culture. Japan has a walking culture, and their waistlines prove which one matters more. 21. They eat fish as their primary protein, and the fatty acid profile reshapes metabolism. Japan consumes more fish per capita than almost any country on Earth. Salmon, mackerel, sardines, horse mackerel, squid, shrimp. Dozens of species rotated throughout the week. Omega-3 fatty acids from fish activate PPAR-alpha in the liver, upregulating genes responsible for fatty acid oxidation. Simultaneously, they suppress SREBP1C, a transcription factor that promotes the creation of new fat from carbohydrates. More fat burning, less fat creation from a protein source. A 2023 clinical trial from the National Center for Global Health and Medicine in Tokyo compared fish-based and red meat-based diets of identical calories. After 12 weeks, the fish group showed a 14% reduction in visceral fat on MRI. The red meat group showed no change. And there's an insulin sensitivity component. Omega-3s improve insulin receptor function on cell membranes, meaning glucose is cleared from the blood more efficiently with less insulin. Lower insulin means less fat storage signal. The effect compounds meal after meal, day after day. Japan doesn't eat fish for weight loss. They eat it because it's abundant, affordable, and culturally central. The metabolic advantage is an accident of geography and tradition. 20. They eat fermented foods at every meal, shaping a microbiome that resists weight gain. Miso, natto, pickled vegetables, soy sauce, koji fermented seasonings. The Japanese gut is colonized by microbial populations that Western guts rarely encounter, and those populations directly influence body weight. The gut-fat axis is no longer theoretical. A 2023 landmark study from Riken performed fecal transplants from lean Japanese donors to obese mice. The mice lost visceral fat without any dietary change. The bacteria alone shifted the metabolic set point. Specific mechanisms are now mapped. Certain gut bacteria produce propionate, a short-chain fatty acid that travels to the liver and activates FAR2 receptors, suppressing lipogenesis. Others produce butyrate that increases expression of fat oxidation genes in adipose tissue. Still others produce metabolites that cross the blood-brain barrier and reduce appetite at the hypothalamic level. The diversity of Japanese fermented food, miso from soybeans, nukazuke from rice bran, umeboshi from plums, tsukemono from vegetables, delivers hundreds of bacterial species in constantly shifting ratios. This prevents the microbial monoculture that Western diets create and that metabolic research associates with obesity. Your gut bacteria are not passengers, they're drivers. And the Japanese feed theirs better than any population on Earth. Here's a detail that illustrates how deeply this shapes metabolism. Researchers have identified specific bacterial species that are enriched in lean Japanese adults and depleted in obese Western adults. Akkermansia mucinophila, Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, and specific strains of Bifidobacterium longum appear consistently in the microbiomes of lean Japanese subjects. These species produce metabolites that improve insulin sensitivity, strengthen the gut barrier, and directly communicate with adipose tissue to promote fat oxidation over fat storage. You can't buy these species in a pill. Most are obligate anaerobes that die on contact with oxygen, but you can cultivate them through consistent fermented food consumption that provides the substrates they need to colonize and thrive. Japan does this 3 times a day, every day, as a fundamental component of cuisine rather than a supplement protocol. 19. They eat breakfast like it matters, because metabolically it does. Japanese breakfast is a full, savory, structured meal. Grilled fish, miso soup, steamed rice, pickled vegetables, an egg, seaweed, green tea. It looks like what most Americans would consider dinner. This matters because the first meal of the day programs the metabolic rhythm for every hour that follows. A protein-rich, fat-containing breakfast stabilizes blood glucose from the first hour of waking. Insulin stays low. Cortisol, which peaks naturally in the morning, is buffered by the amino acid load. Ghrelin is suppressed for 4 to 5 hours. A 2023 study from Tohoku University compared Japanese-style savory breakfasts with Western sweet breakfasts of equal calories. The savory group had 34% lower insulin at lunch, consumed 21% fewer snack calories throughout the day, and showed lower 24-hour glucose variability on continuous monitoring. The Western breakfast of cereal, toast, juice, and flavored yogurt produces an insulin spike by 7 a.m. that crashes by 9:30, triggering hunger, cravings, and cortisol at the exact time most people are supposed to be productive. The Japanese breakfast produces a flat, stable glucose line that holds until lunch. The morning meal sets the metabolic tone. Japan sets it with protein, fat, and fiber. The West sets it with sugar and starch. The body fat percentages reflect the difference. 18. They drink warm or room temperature beverages with meals, never ice cold. Japanese restaurants serve room temperature water, warm barley tea, or hot green tea with meals. Ice water is rare. Cold soda is rarer. And the digestive rationale is straightforward. Digestive enzymes are temperature-sensitive proteins that function optimally at core body temperature, approximately 37 degrees Celsius. When 500 milliliters of ice water enters a stomach full of food, local temperature drops, enzyme activity slows, fat solidifies, gastric emptying delays. A study from the European Journal of Pharmaceutical and Medical Research found that cold water consumption during meals delayed gastric emptying by 20 to 30 minutes compared to warm water. Slower gastric emptying means prolonged fermentation of undigested food, more gas, more bloating, and impaired nutrient absorption, but the weight-relevant mechanism is thermogenic. Warm water between meals increases resting metabolic rate by 8% for approximately 90 minutes, according to a 2022 study from Kyoto Prefectural University. That's modest, per instance, but across 4 servings per day, every day, the cumulative caloric expenditure adds up. Warm drinks also reduce cravings. The sensation of warmth in the stomach registers as comfort in the brain, reducing the emotional hunger that drives most snacking behavior. A cup of warm barley tea at 3 p.m. can replace the candy bar that cold water never could. 17. They eat seaweed daily, and the alginate blocks dietary fat absorption. Wakame in miso soup, nori around rice, kombu in dashi broth, hijiki in side salads. Japanese seaweed consumption delivers a polysaccharide called alginate that physically binds to dietary fat in the stomach and prevents its absorption. A 2022 study from Newcastle University found that alginate reduced dietary fat absorption by up to 75% in the digestive tract. The alginate forms a gel that encapsulates fat globules, carrying them through the intestine before lipase enzymes can break them down. This is passive fat blocking through food. No pill, no side effect, no pharmaceutical intervention, just seaweed in your soup. And there's a thyroid component. Seaweed is the richest dietary source of iodine, the essential mineral for thyroid hormone synthesis. Adequate iodine keeps the thyroid producing T3 and T4 at optimal levels, which governs resting metabolic rate. Subclinical iodine deficiency, common in Western populations, reduces metabolic rate by 10 to 15%, making weight loss harder and weight gain easier without any change in diet. Japan's daily seaweed habit simultaneously blocks fat absorption and optimizes the metabolic engine that burns it. That's 2 anti-obesity mechanisms from a single food group consumed at every meal. 16. They use stairs relentlessly, and the visceral fat effect is disproportionately large. Japanese train stations are notorious for staircases, hundreds of steps between platforms, stairs placed centrally, escalators tucked to the side. The infrastructure prioritizes climbing. Stair climbing is one of the most metabolically demanding daily activities available. It elevates heart rate immediately, engages the largest muscle groups in the body, and triggers excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, the afterburn effect, from efforts as short as 2 to 3 minutes. A 2023 study from Kobe University found that participants climbing an average of 10 flights daily showed a 7.5% reduction in visceral fat over 8 weeks with no other exercise changes. And the intermittent nature of stair climbing, short bursts distributed throughout the day, was more effective for visceral fat reduction than a single continuous exercise session of equivalent total intensity. This finding aligns with emerging research on exercise snacking, the concept that multiple brief bouts of intense activity produce greater metabolic benefits than a single long session. Japanese daily life naturally provides exercise snacks through stair climbing at every station, every office building, every apartment block. 15. They cycle as transportation, hitting the exact intensity that preferentially burns visceral fat. Japan has over 72 million bicycles. Mothers cycle to the grocery store. Businessmen cycle to the station. Students cycle to school. Elderly people cycle to the park. Cycling at a moderate commuting pace sits precisely in the fat oxidation zone, 50 to 65% of maximum heart rate. At this intensity, the body preferentially burns fatty acids over glucose, and visceral fat, being more metabolically active than subcutaneous fat, is mobilized first during moderate aerobic activity. A 2023 systematic review from the Journal of Obesity Research found that steady-state aerobic exercise reduced visceral fat by 6.1% over 12 weeks versus 3.8% for HIIT and 2.2% for resistance training alone. Japan's cycling culture provides 20 to 40 minutes of steady-state fat burning daily, without scheduling, motivation, or gym fees. It's built into the commute. The visceral fat never accumulates because the daily cycling never stops. 14. They sit on the floor, and the constant getting up and down builds core strength and burns calories invisibly. Japanese homes use floor seating for meals, relaxation, and sleep. Each transition from standing to floor to standing is a bodyweight squat engaging glutes, quadriceps, hip flexors, and core stabilizers. Average daily transitions in a floor-sitting household, 20 to 30. That's 20 to 30 unloaded squats per day performed without conscious effort. A 2022 study from Tokyo Metropolitan University found that adults using floor seating had stronger core musculature, better hip mobility, and lower body fat percentages than chair users, even after controlling for structured exercise. And floor sitting is inherently unstable. Unlike a chair that supports your weight passively, the floor requires constant micro-adjustments to maintain balance. Your core stays mildly engaged throughout. Your metabolic rate stays slightly elevated compared to chair sitting, an estimated 10 to 15% higher caloric expenditure per hour. Over 16 waking hours, that difference compounds. And over decades, it creates a measurable divergence in body composition between populations that sit on floors and those that sit in chairs. 13. They eat konnyaku, a zero-calorie food that fills the stomach and feeds fat-burning bacteria. Konjaku, made from konjac root, contains virtually no digestible calories. Its active compound, glucomannan, absorbs up to 50 times its weight in water, swelling into a gel that creates mechanical satiety without caloric input. A 2022 meta-analysis from Keio University found that regular glucomannan intake reduced body weight, lowered LDL cholesterol, and improved bowel regularity without dietary changes. But the prebiotic effect is what makes konjaku uniquely valuable. Glucomannan ferments slowly in the colon, producing sustained butyrate output that feeds Faecalibacterium prosnitzii and other species associated with lean body composition. Unlike commercial prebiotic powders that ferment rapidly and cause bloating, konjaku's complex fiber structure releases its benefits gradually over hours. Japanese families eat konjaku in oden stew, as shirataki noodles in hot pot, and even as a jelly snack. It costs almost nothing. It fills the stomach, it feeds the microbiome, and it delivers exactly 0 calories to your fat stores. 12. They reduce sugar to levels the Western palate would find almost tasteless. Japanese daily sugar consumption averages 32 grams. The American average is 77 grams. That 45-gram daily difference represents roughly 180 excess calories per day in the American diet, entirely from a macronutrient that drives insulin harder than any other and provides zero satiety. Fructose, which comprises roughly half of table sugar and 55% of high fructose corn syrup, bypasses normal appetite regulation. It doesn't trigger leptin. It doesn't suppress ghrelin. It's metabolized almost entirely in the liver, where excess is converted directly into triglycerides and packed into visceral fat. A 2023 intervention study from UC Davis found that participants who reduced added sugar from 75 grams to 25 grams daily lost an average of 2.3 kilograms of visceral fat in 8 weeks without any other dietary change. Sugar reduction alone was sufficient. Japanese cuisine achieves flavor through umami, fermentation, and natural sweetness from vegetables like kabocha squash and sweet potato, rather than added sugar. Desserts are tiny, typically 3 to 4 bites, and eaten occasionally rather than after every meal. Beverages are unsweetened tea or water. Soda consumption per capita is a fraction of America's. The Japanese don't resist sugar through willpower. Their cuisine simply doesn't rely on it. The palate adapts. Within 2 weeks of reducing sugar, natural foods taste sweeter. Fruit becomes dessert, and the metabolic burden that sugar placed on the liver disappears. 11. They eat bitter and sour foods that suppress appetite through hormonal pathways. Western palates have systematically eliminated bitter and sour flavors. Japanese palates embrace them. Bitter melon in stir-fries, pickled plum on rice, vinegared vegetables as sides, shiso leaf as garnish. These flavors aren't just cultural, they're metabolic signals. Bitter compounds trigger cholecystokinin release, the most potent short-term appetite suppressant the body produces. Sour compounds, particularly acetic acid from vinegar and citric acid from umeboshi, activate AMPK, a cellular enzyme that promotes fat oxidation and improves insulin sensitivity. A 2023 study from Kumamoto University found that participants consuming bitter and sour appetizers before meals ate 14% fewer calories and showed 19% lower postprandial insulin without any sensation of restriction. The Western elimination of bitterness and sourness has removed two of the body's most powerful natural appetite regulation signals. Reintroducing them doesn't require discipline. It requires a shift in flavor preference that takes roughly 2 weeks to develop. 10. They eat raw cabbage with every heavy meal, and the enzyme protects against fat accumulation. Walk into any tonkatsu restaurant in Japan, and your plate arrives with a mountain of finely shredded raw cabbage. Most Westerners push it aside. The Japanese eat every strand. Raw cabbage contains S-methylmethionine, vitamin U, that protects the stomach lining from the oxidative damage caused by fatty foods, but the weight-relevant mechanism is different. Raw cabbage is rich in tartanic acid, a compound that inhibits the conversion of carbohydrates into fat in the liver. Additionally, the high fiber volume of shredded cabbage consumed before or alongside calorie-dense food creates mechanical satiety. You physically can't fit as much fried pork in your stomach when it's already half filled with cabbage. A 2022 review from the Japanese Journal of Gastroenterology confirmed that regular raw cabbage consumption was associated with lower visceral fat accumulation and improved hepatic lipid profiles. The mechanism was attributed to both the tartanic acid effect and the preloading fiber effect. It costs almost nothing. It requires no preparation beyond shredding, and it turns the most indulgent meal into a metabolically buffered one. Japan pairs every heavy dish with its antidote. The West serves heavy dishes alone and wonders why the weight comes. 9. They take hot baths that activate brown fat and burn calories during sleep. Japanese nightly bathing at 40 to 41 degrees Celsius produces a post-bath cooling period that activates brown adipose tissue, the metabolically active fat that burns calories to generate heat. Brown fat uses fatty acids released from white adipose tissue, including visceral fat, as its primary fuel source. When activated by thermal cycling, heating during the bath followed by cooling afterward, brown fat can burn an additional 100 to 200 calories over the hours following the bath. A 2022 study from Jichi Medical University found that participants who took nightly warm baths showed increased brown fat activity on PET scans and reduced visceral fat over 12 weeks, independent of diet or exercise changes. Japan provides this stimulus every night. 365 thermal cycles per year. The brown fat stays active. The visceral fat stays mobilized, and the caloric expenditure occurs while sleeping, requiring no effort beyond filling a bathtub. 8. They eat slowly enough to allow the full satiety hormone cascade to complete. This deserves deeper explanation because the hormonal cascade is more complex and more powerful than simple fullness. When food enters the digestive tract, hormones are released in a specific temporal sequence. First, CCK from the duodenum at approximately 5 minutes, then GLP-1 from the lower intestine at 10 to 15 minutes, then PYY from the colon at 15 to 20 minutes. Then leptin amplification from adipose tissue at 20 to 30 minutes. Each hormone amplifies the next, And the final composite signal, the one that actually makes you put down your fork, only arrives when the complete cascade has matured. This takes 20 to 25 minutes minimum. When you eat in 11 minutes, you short-circuit the cascade at GLP-1. PYY never peaks. Leptin never amplifies. The stop signal never arrives at full strength. You overeat. Japanese meal culture. Small bites. Chopsticks, multiple dishes, conversation extends eating time past the 25-minute threshold consistently. The cascade completes. The signal arrives. And the Japanese stop eating with food still on the table. Not because they're disciplined, but because their hormones told them to. 7. They practice radio taiso, 10 minutes of morning calisthenics that extend overnight fat burning. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., NHK broadcasts Radio Taiso, a national calisthenics program that millions of Japanese perform together. Arm circles, torso twists, leg swings, stretches. 10 minutes. Nothing extreme, but the timing is metabolically strategic. During sleep, the body runs primarily on fatty acid oxidation. When you wake and immediately eat, you shift the fuel source to glucose, and the fat-burning window closes. When you wake and move first, even gently, you extend the fat oxidation state for an additional 60 to 90 minutes. A 2022 study from the Japan Sports Agency found that morning calisthenics before breakfast maintained elevated fat oxidation rates for 90 minutes longer than a sedentary morning routine. Over 30 days, that's 45 to 90 additional hours in a fat-burning state from 10 minutes of daily movement. Radio Taiso isn't exercise. It's a metabolic switch that tells the body, we're active today, keep burning fat. And 10 minutes is all it takes to flip it. 6. They sleep 7 to 8 hours consistently, preventing the hormonal chaos that drives fat storage. Sleep deprivation does two things that guarantee weight gain. It increases ghrelin by 15%, making you hungrier, and it decreases leptin by 15%, making it harder to feel full. The result is a hormonally driven overconsumption that no amount of willpower can consistently override. But the visceral fat mechanism is even more direct. Sleep deprivation elevates cortisol. Cortisol preferentially directs fat storage to the abdominal cavity because visceral adipocytes have 4 times more cortisol receptors than subcutaneous fat cells. Poor sleep doesn't make you fat everywhere. It makes you fat specifically in the belly. A 2023 study from Mayo Clinic found that participants sleeping 4 hours per night for 2 weeks gained visceral fat at a rate 11% higher than their rested baseline. Despite eating the same calories, Japanese cultural rhythms support consistent sleep. Earlier dinners, evening bathing that induces physiological drowsiness, reduced late-night eating, less caffeine after mid-afternoon. The lifestyle protects the sleep. The sleep protects the waistline. 5. They manage stress through bathing, nature, and silence, rather than stress eating. In the West, stress eating is the norm. Comfort food, emotional snacking, cortisol-driven cravings for sugar and fat. The stress food pathway is one of the primary drivers of obesity in America. Japan interrupts this pathway at the source. Evening bathing lowers cortisol before it can trigger cravings. Forest walks, Shinrin-yoku, Reduce cortisol by 16% per session. Tea ceremonies enforce 45 minutes of forced deceleration. Garden tending provides rhythmic, repetitive motion that activates parasympathetic tone. A 2023 study from the Japanese Society of Psychosomatic Medicine found that participants who replaced stress eating with structured relaxation practices, bathing, walking, breathing, showed a 23% reduction in cortisol and lost an average of 2.1 centimeters of waist circumference over 8 weeks without dietary changes. Japan doesn't treat stress with food. Japan treats stress with water, trees, and stillness, and the weight loss that follows isn't the goal. It's the side effect of a nervous system that stops screaming for sugar because it found something better. 4. They barely drink alcohol, and when they do, portions are tiny. Japanese alcohol consumption exists, but is structurally different from Western drinking. Beer comes in 250 milliliters glasses, not pints. Sake is served in 90 milliliters ceramic cups. Drinking is accompanied by small plates of food. Binge drinking is culturally discouraged. Alcohol is uniquely fattening because of how the liver processes it. When ethanol enters the liver, all fat oxidation stops. The liver prioritizes detoxification, and during that process, it converts excess acetate into fatty acids that are preferentially stored as visceral fat. One night of heavy drinking suppresses fat oxidation for up to 48 hours. 2 days where your body physically cannot burn belly fat. Multiply that by weekly weekend drinking, and you've eliminated 100 or more days per year from your fat-burning capacity. A 2022 study from the Japanese Journal of Alcohol Studies found that participants reducing alcohol from 14 drinks per week to 4 lost an average of 2.8 centimeters of waist circumference in 8 weeks without other changes. Japan drinks less, slower, smaller, and always with food. The liver stays available for fat metabolism instead of being hijacked by ethanol processing. 3. They eat the whole meal in the right order, at the right speed, in the right quantity, at the right time. This is the system, not a single habit. The architecture of how Japan eats, taken as a complete structure. Soup first, then vegetables, then protein, then rice, eaten slowly, from small dishes with chopsticks, stopping at 80% full, no snacks until the next meal. Green tea throughout, warm beverages, fermented foods at every sitting. Each element independently produces a modest metabolic advantage. Together they create a compound effect that explains how an entire nation eats carbohydrates at every meal and maintains a 4.5% obesity rate. Western nutrition science studies individual nutrients in isolation. Japan practices a meal system where every component supports every other component. The soup reduces intake. The vegetable sequencing reduces glucose. The chopsticks reduce speed. The small dishes reduce portions. The fermented foods optimize the microbiome. The tea maintains fat oxidation. The stopping point prevents excess. No single element is the answer. The system is the answer. 2. They don't moralize food, and the absence of guilt prevents the binge-restrict cycle that drives Western obesity. In Japan, food is food. There's no good food and bad food. There's no guilt after eating tempura. There's no punishment workout after rice. There's no cheat day because there's no diet to cheat on. This matters because guilt drives restriction. Restriction drives binging. Binging drives guilt. The cycle that keeps Western dieters trapped in yo-yo patterns for decades is absent in Japanese food culture because the moral framework that generates it doesn't exist. A 2023 study from the International Journal of Eating Disorders found that dietary guilt was the single strongest predictor of binge-eating episodes, stronger than hunger, stronger than food availability, stronger than emotional state. People who felt guilty about food ate more of it, not less. Japanese children learn no food rules. They learn meal structure. They learn portion awareness. They learn to eat slowly. They learn to appreciate variety. But they never learn that a cookie is morally wrong, or that eating rice requires atonement through exercise. The absence of food morality creates the psychological stability that allows the Japanese to eat moderately, consistently, and without the explosive overconsumption that guilt produces. They eat tempura, enjoy it, and move on. No aftermath, no spiral, no 3 a.m. trip to the refrigerator to compensate for the shame. This extends to how Japan discusses body weight publicly. School health checks measure BMI but frame results in terms of health rather than appearance. The cultural language around weight is medical, not aesthetic. There's no beach body season. There's no summer shred. The motivation for eating well is feeling well, not looking a certain way. And that motivational framing produces dramatically different long-term behavioral outcomes. Because health-oriented goals are sustainable, while appearance-oriented goals generate the anxiety and perfectionism that fuel eating disorders and yo-yo dieting. The Japanese relationship with food is remarkably uncomplicated. They eat what tastes good. They eat until they're satisfied. They stop. They don't think about food again until the next meal. That simplicity is the rarest and most valuable weight management tool in existence. And it costs nothing but the willingness to stop punishing yourself for eating. 1. They built a system where leanness is the default, not the goal. This is the truth that the entire Western weight loss industry is built to obscure. The Japanese are not thin because they try to be thin. They're thin because every element of their daily life, food, transportation, architecture, social structure, cultural norms, bathing habits, sleep patterns, works together to make fat accumulation nearly impossible. There's no single Japanese weight loss secret. There's a system. The post-meal walk lowers insulin. The small portions prevent caloric excess. The fermented foods optimize the microbiome. The green tea maintains fat oxidation. The bath activates brown fat. The sleep normalizes cortisol. The walking accumulates NEAT. The floor sitting engages the core. The fish provides omega-3s. The seaweed blocks fat absorption. The chopsticks enforce slow eating. The vegetables come first. The soup preloads the stomach. The bitter foods suppress appetite. The sugar stays low. The alcohol stays small. Each one is modest. Together, they produce a metabolic environment where excess body fat cannot persist. Western weight loss asks, how do I lose fat? Japan asks, how do I live so that fat never accumulates? The first question creates an industry. The second creates a nation of lean people who never think about their weight. You don't need a diet. You don't need a gym. You don't need a drug. You need a system. Japan built one over 1,000 years. You can build yours in 30 days. Start with one habit, then stack another. Let them compound, because that's how leanness works, in the only country that's actually figured it out. Not through effort, through design. 30 habits. No restriction, no counting, no suffering. Just the daily architecture of a culture that made leanness inevitable instead of aspirational. Your body isn't broken. Your system is. Fix the system, and the weight fixes itself. Japan proved it with 125 million people. The evidence isn't theoretical. It's walking past you in every train station in Tokyo right now. Slim, energetic, and carrying a bento box that contains exactly what their body needs and nothing more. Start building your system today. You don't need to adopt all 30 habits at once. Start with 3. Eat soup before your meals. Walk for 15 minutes after eating. Stop when you're 80% full. Do those 3 things for 2 weeks. You'll feel the difference before you see it. Your energy will stabilize. Your afternoon crash will disappear. Your relationship with hunger will change from adversarial to informational. Then add 3 more. Swap bread for rice. Eat vegetables first. Replace one snack with green tea. Let the habits stack. Let them interact. Let the system build itself, because that's how Japan did it. Not through a national diet program. Not through government-mandated exercise. Through centuries of cultural refinement that shaped daily life into a metabolic environment where excess weight simply cannot persist. The answer was never a pill, a program, or a punishment. It was always a way of living, and it's available to you right now.